outdoor dining and liability concerns. A little information about CED Technologies. We are an engineering company that provides expert witness support. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today with regard to engineering, expert witness services, and outdoor dining concerns are going to involve OSHA. We have experts in premises liability, product liability, human factors, construction. There's going to be a little bit about vehicle and pedestrian accidents in here. CED has been working on, with, we started with one office in Annapolis, Maryland in 1987. Since then, we've got several different regions up and down the East Coast and into the Midwest. I am in our Cleveland, Ohio office. Brian is in our Annapolis, Maryland office, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to give us an overview of what we're presenting on today. And he's going to dive right in. So, Brian, it's all you.
So the primary issue at hand here is outdoor dining and the changes that means for premises liability. And so in a grand scheme of things, one of the, we want to talk about workplace changes and how that relates to OSHA. We want to be mindful of weather conditions. Then we have issues regarding lighting and obstacle avoidance. We now have a greater and heightened concern for pedestrians, as well as vehicular traffic considerations. So it's not so much that OSHA has changed. What's changed is our workplace. So as we talk about patrons and our wait staff and food runners, that the changes in seating regulations for outdoor seating causes our travel paths to change. So now our workplace now includes entrances and vestibules. If we have dining on sidewalks, now we have parking lots. Ramps are going to be a factor, and curb cuts, as well as here in Annapolis, there's a lot of waterside restaurants. So we have concerns with docks and piers and decks that are now, that were previously just walking surfaces that are now part of our workplace surface as well.
And one of the things you brought up, Brian, before we get into the next part of it, is that you had said, you know, it's not necessarily that these standards or these places in themselves have changed, but it's just a matter of we're seeing different uses for different things right now, which sort of changes the whole outcome and the potential for liability, right?
That's right. It's not that OSHA has changed. It's the fact that now in the workplace, you now include the entire travel path out the front door to wherever people are dining at. That needs to be of greater concern. That previously may not have got quite the attention as it would as an interior dining or restaurant experience.
So these aren't new issues for us. It's just a different way of looking at them, right?
That's right. So if we talk about OSHA, there's the overriding general duty clause we always need to be concerned about and be aware of, that the employer has a requirement to maintain safe and hazard-free workplace. So as our workplace has now changed, that means that we have to continue to make sure that we're being safe and hazard-free in these different kinds of settings. I often see this repeated video of prom where we have all this big, huge groups, all these numerous couples together on a dock. And it's kind of funny that the dock collapses and the people end up all wet, and that really sucks for these prom patrons. But I would expect that you could have similar kind of issues occur as you increase the load level on decks and docks and piers or waterside that previously was not meant for that amount of load from a dining experience. So we want to be careful and mindful of these kinds of changes, that no matter what we're doing, we are ensuring that we're being safe and that we maintain this hazard-free workplace. So also in particular is our concern for safe walking surfaces. This is OSHA 1910.22. We have to make sure that our walking and working surface is free of hazards. So that includes things like slips, trips, missteps, and falls. A slip is commonly where we have a lubricant on the walking surface. Our most notable and common lubricant is precipitation, water. Trip occurs when we have an unexpected change in elevation. Maybe it's a single step riser. Maybe it's a small little interface between two pieces of sidewalk step at a seam. A misstep is where there's 6 steps in a stairway and I walk down 5 and I blow the last one. That's a misstep. I wasn't expecting one more step before I fall on my face. And the last one is falls, where we have an unexpected or an unplanned loss of balance for some reason. Maybe it's a ramp that doesn't have a handrail. Maybe for whatever reason that I lose my balance and causes me to fall and contact the walking surface. So we need to be concerned about pedestrian travel, where we expect travel to be, where we don't expect travel to be. Our walking and working surfaces needs to be focused on where we expect pedestrian travel. If we have areas that are cordoned off, that are not part of our expected pedestrian travel, that's going to be exempt from OSHA. So we're doing a good job to provide some sort of visual cues. Don't walk here. This is not for patrons. This is not for our wait staff. And we try and avoid that. So this leads us into our weather conditions. You know, with outdoor dining, now we have weather that's a factor. We have rain like it is today here in Annapolis. It's pouring down like crazy. That's our primary concern because that's going to bring water in all kinds of places. If I'm a part of the wait staff or a food runner, I'm now moving into outside, outside to inside. I'm bringing that water with me back to the interior of the building, which means I need to be concerned about, as the owner operator, I need to be concerned about drag out. So walk-off mats and making sure that my interior floor is dry is going to be crucial because I now have employees who are going to be in and out from wet and dry conditions on a far more frequent basis. Now, also with weather, we could have concerns with flash thunderstorms, right? That's going to present lightning considerations. Also with that is going to come high winds. We'll talk a little bit more about structures, but you know, we've got winds that are going to cause chairs to move, tables to tip, tents and these structures to become unstable. We need to be concerned about how our weather is going to affect our dining experience as well as the safety of everyone involved.
Probably makes a good case, Brian, I would imagine, for a lot of places that are utilizing outdoor dining more to consider plastic drinkware and plastic flatware because, you know, like you said, with rain and wind already in the mix, then you've got glass and porcelain and sharp metal objects that could be flying around. I mean, that presents a whole another batch of problems.
Sure, we didn't, you know, as we get an uplift kind of problem, now we've got, you know, glassware and dinner plates that are sliding, that are, you know, a little less stable than expected otherwise, that are now we've got, you know, issues on the walking surface, somebody stepping on a piece of broken glass. We have to be far more vigilant, and plastic certainly does help minimize some of that. I would agree. So let's talk about lighting factors. When you have an indoor dining experience, you have a minimum lighting concern. So we need to be concerned with how do we maintain that new minimum lighting that's set at 30 lux for interior settings. But now if we move to a parking lot, you can have lighting that's only 2 lux. That's the measure of illumination on a walking surface. So we have now a problem where we've got a tent or a pergola or some sort of structure that may be obstructing the artificial lighting already in an outdoor area. And we need to make sure that we're providing enough illumination that we ensure the safety, that you can now clearly see the walking surface, that we can make it far more visible to see contrast and see obstructions that previously was not intended for that sort of setting.
I think too, Brian, this picture I think gives a great example of it. Is I think a lot of people, a lot of places are going to wrestle with the ambiance of what they're trying to do outside. You know, like in this picture, they've got those sort of holiday lights on the tree to make a warm and classy atmosphere, but that alone is just not going to provide the kind of light you need. I mean, you're really going to have to step that up, right?
I agree. You know, in this kind of setting, it looks like this was already pre-designed and set up for that. And I like the holiday lights on the tree, and the small little table tents probably doesn't impact the lighting too much. But if you're going to have a large commercial tent set up in a parking lot, you're going to obstruct a lot of your security and safety lighting that are going to make things far more dim. In that sort of scenario, you need to ensure that you have some sort of artificial light inside your tent environment. So this is a good example of how things can be done right. I'd be more concerned with what it's like once the sun goes down. So with that, I mentioned this already with obstacle recognition and avoidance. Our change in venue is going to create a whole other set of complications, right? So now we have chairs and tables and patrons maybe set up on a sidewalk, that now we have to make sure we have the ability to have obstacle avoidance. We have passing patrons, pedestrians that need to make sure that they can walk themselves around chairs and tables. That we have patrons who are now seating in an area that was not previously seating, where we have to concern that we have to make sure that we have contrasting surface conditions. For instance, a single riser step is an easy example where if you can't recognize the change in elevation, you now have a trip hazard. So we want to make sure that we use a paint to highlight that change in elevation, but using the right paint is incredibly important. We want to make sure that we're using an outdoor paint specifically designed for the surface that's meant to be walked on, that has grit, so that we don't create a slick surface where we end up with a slip and fall. So we want to make sure that if we have multiple steps or a ramp that previously did not have a handrail is a great way to provide a change in elevation. So we want to make sure that if we've got, for instance, a temporary ramp to overcome a single riser, or a curb that doesn't have a curb cut nearby, that each of these are well lit, that they have contrasting colors, and that we're doing things that make good sense to make safe travel. I mentioned to you previously on the previous slide about temporary lighting fixtures. Maybe it's more than just inside the tent. We may need to provide some temporary accent lighting to highlight some of these changes to make things more aware of our pedestrian traffic.
Two things that stick out there to me, Brian. One, you mentioned painting to highlight elevation changes, and I know that's something that we've seen cases with for years. You mentioned having paint with grit in it, because frankly, if you're painting a curb or part of a sidewalk with paint that's not designed for that, it's really just going to get more slippery as it gets wet. And we've also seen in the past people even just taking regular paint and pouring sand into it, thinking that if they mix that up really good, that would sort of create like sandpaper on the ground, and it just doesn't work that way. I mean, it doesn't bind. The other thing that you talked about that made me think too was about the temporary light fixtures, where not even necessarily just the light, but the cords and extension cords that could be going across the walking area or a dining area. I know some places have like nylon, or what do you call it, plastic ramps that temporarily go over these. But these are all just more things to throw into the mix.
Sure. You're absolutely right when it comes to conduit cords, electrical cords make an easy trip hazard, especially when they're unexpected. And I do like that there are several companies that manufacture a no trip kind of cord that allows you to step over it, or one is colored, it's yellow, so it's bright and it's obvious to you, and two, it's tapered so that it doesn't become a trip hazard for you.
Sure.
Of course, the best thing to do is, if you can, is you route all that electric and all those potential trip hazards in an area that is not part of your pedestrian traffic.
I think that's a great segue into pedestrian concerns.
Certainly. So we now have lots of concerns. And I like this image that you showed, Chris, because here you see a setup with awnings, and we can see there's lots of outdoor dining. You can see on the outside of the sidewalk, there's some planter pots and things like that that are close near this divider wall. And as you come around the corner, there's a tall handrail or a guard to kind of separate the patio and dining experience from the passerbys. And this is exactly what we talk about, this conflict between pedestrians and patrons. We want to make sure that there's some designated way, some visual cue to separate pedestrians from patrons. We don't want pedestrians to contact chair legs or table legs that's going to cause potential trip hazard. In the same sense, we need to make sure that pedestrians have sufficient area to pass by each other, because we're going to narrow the sidewalk width. Because you have two directional traffic on a sidewalk, if it's too narrow, you now are going to have a problem with pedestrians stepping off the sidewalk onto the curb, potentially into vehicular traffic, or getting too close to patrons that lead into our trip hazard kind of problem.
Another great segue into vehicle factors in these situations.
It's amazing how they all kind of tie in together into each other. Vehicles, as drivers, we expect pedestrians to be in the vehicle path at a crosswalk. When that does not happen, we have unexpected conditions and potential for injury. So this is exactly what I was talking before about, how we have these narrowed sidewalks that may force pedestrians into vehicular travel paths. This could be a real problem, especially if there's no curbside parking. As we move
something
away
very
from,
notable. Something very notable I wanted to jump in with this we talked about, Brian, was that with the pedestrian issues and the vehicle issues, which again, these were never new to us, but the only thing is now with a lot more outdoor seating and restaurants and bars trying to get as many people in with their limited capacity now, but we also have food delivery being so much more popular now than it's been in the past. And add on to all this, we've got food runners, we've got guys on bicycles that are delivering food, we've got cars coming up and pulling up in front of a place with people running in and out, we've got people with wagons or bicycle trailers. I mean, more and more opportunities for problems.
Certainly. You bring up a good point for me that, restaurant owners, I think, are going to want to keep their patrons fairly close. And I saw recently here where a tent was placed in the parking lot, but it was so close that it narrowed the vehicular travel path in front of the curbside. And I thought to myself, well, this could be a real problem for emergency staff, right? A fire truck or ambulance, if there was some sort of emergency. Now we've got a loss of travel width that's going to create a problem. And you're absolutely right. As we have food runners that are trying to go from business to the curbside, we've got to make sure that we know where vehicles are supposed to be, where they're not allowed to go, that there's pylons, that there's cones, that there's designations in some way that kind of clearly delineate now the new change of where cars are supposed to go, where drivers are supposed to meet for curbside pickup, so that we can make sure that we keep some separation from our patrons and pedestrians.
Hey, Brian, we've got a question I think that fits in well with that, and someone involved here asks, would it be advisable or not to contact or to look up local municipal codes before infringing on the sidewalks? Do sidewalks have specific width requirements?
It definitely depends on the municipality. For instance, Annapolis, being a very old town, has fairly narrow sidewalks, as opposed to DC, where you have much wider expanses. You might have 12-foot wide sidewalks, where having that space for seating probably has little impact to pedestrian travel. When I walk in downtown Annapolis, it's very narrow.
If you're a restaurant owner, I guess, depending on how you look at it, but is that something you should check into before you start putting tables out on the sidewalk and make sure you're within advisable limitations?
I absolutely would, yes. And certainly you could contact us and we can, help navigate that for you.
All right, let's get into, come on. There we go. Temporary structures.
Oh, yeah. So I'm amazed to see how many new temporary structures have set up just in our own locale. I've seen all kinds of structures set up, whether it's, simple tents, easy ups that we called them. A pergola is a bit more of a permanent kind of structure. We have table umbrellas. And then we see something as large as commercial kind of tents. Their construction and installation is going to be absolutely critical here for outdoor dining, right? And this latest picture here, I like this. You can see that there's landscaping that's helped put up in place to put some separation between diners and pedestrians. But as we talk about some of these temporary structures as truly concerning, some of them were not meant for the purpose by which we're going to use them. Others that are more commercial grade, commercial size, are specifically for this exact purpose. I recently saw a massive tent, probably 40 feet by 60 feet, that was, multi-pole commercial setup. And what was most notable to me was how it was anchored. It was set up on a parking lot, and instead of tethers and spikes into the parking lot surface, they used 55-gallon drums. And I like that because the tether now moves to a 55-gallon drum, and the drum is such a large object that it removes itself from being a tripping hazard. It's a bit of an obstruction, but less likely to cause personal injury from a trip than a spike into the parking lot surface. So I think anchoring is going to be a big deal. I think that these easy up tents that are meant for, short duration residential use kind of canopies, I have 2 in my garage. We need to be concerned about how they are assembled. Oh, here we go, great picture of an easy up. And in this case, this image here does not show any anchoring at all. I would be truly concerned about wind uplift, and I would be concerned about, as it is anchored, how is that done to make sure that we don't create a tripping hazard.
I know we've seen some cases with tents like this before, and sometimes it even gets into product issues where there just wasn't enough venting for wind to pass through, where it created more of a wing than a pass through. But another thing, I like that idea with the 55-gallon drum full of water, because if you've ever tripped over a tent at a party wearing flip-flops, that'll ruin your night for sure.
Absolutely.
And I keep getting back to this, none of these issues are necessarily new to us, but as you can see with the rising popularity of outdoor dining and people wanting to get out more, and like we talked about, more foot traffic and more temporary structures, this all just sort of compounds one on the next to really create some potentially dangerous situations that I think could really create some liabilities that were always there, but now just seem to have a chance for more to happen.
Agreed.
I think, see here, I think that pretty much wraps up the major points we were looking to talk about today. Again, if you want to put in more, any questions or anything through this, we're happy to stay on for a few more minutes and answer them. Otherwise, if you have anything specific for Brian, I've posted his email address here. My email address is here as well if you have any general questions about CED or the services we offer. I'm getting off the screen share here. I do see something. Good point. We do have a comment here in the chat that OSHA only pertains to employees. General liability city codes pertains to the customers and non-employees. Some people are unaware of the difference.
That's very true. That is very true. However, we often make the analogy that, if it applied to an employee, you would expect the same to apply to a non-employee, right? The walking surface condition for a slip and fall would be the same whether it was an employee or not.
Okay, well, again, our presentation has come to a close. If anybody has anything they want to jump in with, if they want to post it in the chat or the Q&A, Brian and I will stay on for a few minutes. But otherwise, I think we've taken a good chunk of your lunch, so we'll let you have the rest of the hour to ponder all this liability concern that we've talked about today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.